Today, we have a special guest, Claire from Faith Unhaunted. We're going to be talking about her deconversion story and diving into that on the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcasts. My name is Derry.
And my name is Ethan, and make sure to check us out on all the social medias where you normally are, but not really all of them because we're not on TikTok or Facebook. We're mainly on Instagram and YouTube, and anywhere else you find podcasts. You can ask us questions, you can suggest episodes, and you can interact with us, and we'd love to talk to you. So check us out. And yes, we have on Claire. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. What's going on? How are you doing?
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, your background? I know like you have a page on Instagram where you're sharing your perspective about deconversion and deconstruction. So anything about that, we'd love to know a little bit about your life.
Yeah, so I grew up to two American parents in France. I was a missionary kid with a pretty small organization called Greater Europe Mission. Have you guys heard of Greater Europe Mission?
Mm-mm.
No.
Okay, it's pretty niche, much smaller than YWAM. And yeah, they were super involved my whole life.
Are they still in it?
No, they're not in France any longer, but my dad still works for a ministry, and then my mom is a teacher now
Cool.
for a Christian school. But yeah, I was super involved in their ministry growing up. And then I went to college and was super involved with church ministries at Baylor. And then, yeah, I kind of started thinking through some different things, some different life things that were happening in the world, and ended up kind of walking away from my faith, as we've discussed. And I'm now really passionate about creating conversations for people, just to allow them to kind of think through what faith looks like in their lives. My goal is not necessarily to change people's beliefs, but more to allow spaces where people think through what they are choosing to believe.
Got it. I know it's great to create those spaces. I know for a lot of people on both sides, it can be very like it's the most, if not, well, it's not the most, it's one of the most stressful things in your life. Like it's at least for Christians, like if you lose your faith, if you're like really sold out for it, like it's so destabilizing. It's what your community is based around off, your belief systems, your moral and ethical systems, like losing all of that and changing what you believe or having that happen to you, it can be super disorienting. So it's great to have those spaces where people can ask good questions without feeling afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like having doubt and changing your mind it's a part of faith. It's a part of growing up. And I think it's really important to be able to think through things. I think whenever churches or any environment, I'm sure this happens in atheistic environments as well, where people try to shut down doubt and questions, I think that's really unhealthy. I think it's really good to ask questions and challenge ourselves.
Yeah. That's kind of the point of our podcast.
Yeah.
I'd love to know from you, just so we can hop into it quickly. Where do you find yourself now, if you're willing to share? I'm sure you're on a journey, but where are you now? And then what led you there? Like, what were some of the things that started this for you?
Yeah. So I'd say that at the moment I would consider myself agnostic. And I don't envision myself ever getting to a point where I'm like, I am an atheist. I think calling yourself an atheist can take a lot of certainty. And I personally just don't think that certainty is something that we can for sure have in life. So I'm comfortable calling myself an agnostic in the sense that I just don't know. But yeah, so a few things that kind of led to this place that I'm at now. So I was super involved in church stuff in college. I was leading a bunch of ministries. I think, Derry, I maybe mentioned to you, I was leading a young adult group called Refuge.
So funny. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty funny. And yeah, so I was doing that, leading a bunch of like life groups, Bible studies, discipling a few different people. I was always really committed to my faith. But then during COVID, as you guys probably know, things started getting really heated in politics and just kind of the way I was seeing Christians respond to what was going on. Yeah.
Just kidding.
He's joking.
Okay. I thought that was sincere. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay,
Oh, this guy lives under a rock.
Yeah. What's COVID? Never heard of that. I saw a lot of Christians just being like, I don't want to wear a mask. I don't need to wear a mask. God's going to protect me. And there was just a lot of disregard for other human life and kind of a belief that because they were Christians, they were untouchable and God would protect them at all costs. And that's just, as you guys know, that's not the reality. Christians don't get out of life without suffering, just because they believe in God and have a relationship with Jesus.
Sure.
So that's kind of one thing. And as I was going through college, I was kind of experiencing that a lot of things that I had grown up believing were sin were actually a lot more gray than I thought they were. For example, I grew up being told that saying swear words was really wrong. And yeah, I kind of just started meeting people who, when they use swear words, it wasn't from a place of being malicious. It was from a place of wanting to communicate better, or for a sense of humor or that kind of thing. It was from a place that wasn't like a desire to sin or be mean. So that was kind of one thing. Or like alcohol use. Like my parents are pretty against alcohol use, but I started meeting people, lots of Christians who consumed alcohol very responsibly. So like my definition of sin was kind of shifting. And when I left college, I joined another church. I was pretty intent on finding another church in Dallas where I moved to. But for the first time in my life, I was kind of like, you know what, I need to take a step back and not be in a leadership role, because for so long I had been in leadership roles, and you guys might experience this as well. I think when you are in a leadership role, that can be a motivator for your own faith. That can be a motivator to keep pushing for your beliefs. And it's very hard to step out or question a belief system when other people are relying on you to teach them.
True.
So for the first time in my life, or the first time in a few years at least, I was kind of like, I'm going to just allow myself to be a member of the congregation and listen. And if I have questions that I need to ask in my life, I'm going to take the time to do that. That year, I ended up feeling a lot of like anger and frustration towards God. I was going through some health problems. And I had been in a lot of environments. I think in YWAM, you guys would have seen this as well. But I was in some pretty charismatic circles where God healing people was a pretty big part of what we believed and experienced. And this might be a whole other story, but I personally had prayed for people and seen them receive healing. So that was kind of like why isn't God healing me? So I was kind of experiencing a lot of anger and frustration towards this one vision that I had of God. As I kind of like started to give myself the time to think through, I ended up dating a guy who's an atheist, and I was really holding on for dear life to my faith because I really wanted to change his mind. I really wanted to bring him to faith. But after we broke up, I was like, you know what? I'm having a lot of questions myself, and I've just been holding on for dear life and kind of ignoring these questions. So I'm finally going to allow myself to ask them and not worry about where this process leads me. Because I think for so long, anytime I ask questions, I would direct it to lead me to a certain end goal, to stay in the faith. And for the first time, I was like, you know what? If this leads me to a different conclusion, that's okay. I want to follow where the questions take me and like be honestly intellectually curious. So those are kind of some of the things that brought me to where I am.
Wow.
Yeah,
I went through a very similar experience with deconstruction, at least. Just like being tired of, I don't know if I told you this or not, like in our DMs back and forth about this process. Did I tell you about that at all?
A little bit, but go on, tell me more.
I don't go into it a lot, but just a similar process of like, I've been avoiding these questions for a long time. I need to actually figure out what I think. and I quit ministry for I allowed myself to ask those questions for like 3 months while I was still working in ministry, and then it became like more obsessive. Like I was like, I can't like keep doing this sincerely and keep asking these questions. So then I took off ministry for 3 months and moved home and asked myself like those questions very seriously. So I can relate at least to like the pressure and like the needing to know and have some kind of certainty for those questions.
Yeah, definitely. And another little bit that I'll add to my story, I grew up very seriously reading the Bible every day. That was a huge part of my faith, my practice. I kind of would just read like snippets. I wouldn't read through the Bible entirely every year, but I'd read different books, you know, kind of as you do. And then my final year of college, I was like, okay, I'm finally going to read through beginning to end in chronological order. As are you guys familiar with the Bible Recap by Tara Lee Cobble?
No.
Okay. She does a podcast where she like walks through chapters of the Bible every day. And yeah, so I ended up going through that. And as I was reading through the Bible from beginning to end, I had probably read through the Bible many times before that in pieces, but this was the first time that I read through it from beginning to end. And for the first time, I was just like very disenchanted, very frustrated with how it was being taught to me. And Tara Lee Cobble she's very mainstream Christian. She's not like some out there, like most Christians that you meet would probably know who she is. And yeah, she's quite big. I kind of just realized like, okay, this interpretation that I'm being given of the Bible is actually confusing me more. It does not make sense of what I'm seeing here. And so I started studying the Bible more and more through different lenses, and studying the Bible more through those other lenses is also kind of what contributed to leading me to where I am today.
Got it.
So,
yeah. I looked up. I don't know who she is. So I guess I'm
okay.
in the mainstream.
Yeah,
but
I don't know who she is either. One thing I noticed, I was looking through some of your videos on Instagram that you were showing, and something I noticed that came up was a pretty common question that a lot of people who aren't Christians or were Christians have frustrations with, which is it's a thing that Christians always talk about and kind of struggle with, is this idea of God commanding murder sometimes in the Bible. In this case, genocide, and the people will say like, "Oh, did God command genocide?" in Joshua and stuff like that. So I'd be curious to dive into some of those specific questions because I know we're a little bit short on time. I don't want to brush over your story, so we can obviously keep going through the story, but I want to make sure we get to some of those fun questions that we might not see eye to eye on, but have some good cordial conversations on. Because I'd be curious now that you're agnostic with. Not just that question. That question is just like the archetype of the questions, but like in all your questions. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you think agnosticism kind of answers those questions that you had for the God of the Bible? Or are they really not that answered, but you are more comfortable with that because you like maybe there's some thing that you found in being agnostic that you didn't find being Christian, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'll do my best to answer that. And I'll use your example as an example as well. So I think, it did really bother me to think that like God would command the massacre of people. And the answers that I'd been given answers to those questions when I was a Christian, but they just never really felt fully satisfying to me. And so, kind of like I said, I started studying the Bible a lot more. And I think we can probably get into a debate of like, the scholars that I study say this. No, the scholars that I study say this. We could get into a debate like that and never end. But I will just say from what I've studied, what I've seen, a lot of historical analysis, archaeology doesn't actually show that those things happened. So the Bible's a very interesting book. I was taught to observe it from a very literal lens. I was taught to read it in a very literal sense. But then as I studied it more, it became apparent that a lot of the stories are what's called historical narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So not exact historical accounts, and maybe you guys have kind of seen this too, but historical narrative is more about framing a political moment, a moment in history. And there's a framework, there's a lens, there's a goal in mind. And so I don't think that God actually commanded the Israelites to kill all of those people. So that's not really an ethical issue for me, because I don't believe that God was literally telling those people, go massacre all these people. But I think what was going on was that the Israelites had, they had a goal, they had a religion, a point of view that they wanted to preserve, a way of life. And so whenever they wrote about their own stories, they would use exaggerations, they would like use specific numbers that had symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of symbolism in the Bible, as you guys undoubtedly know. And yeah, it wasn't so much about like literally we killed 400,000 people, but more this is the story that we're telling about our God.
Okay, yeah. So for you, it's not like a moral, ethical problem. Like some people will be like, "How can a good God do this?" It's more for you, like I just don't believe that happened.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Just the way that I read the Bible now is more from a perspective of like these are human beings who were doing the best that they could to understand their moment in time and their relationship with God.
So it seems like a product of a previous decision about the Bible being inspired or not being inspired, right?
Yes, that is
Can you take us through that then?
Yeah, man, I think that really is getting at the core of the question, Derry. As I was reading the Bible, for that last time, that time that I read through the Bible entirely, you see so many stories that are retold. There's a lot of retellings of the same stories. For example, in the Gospels, you get a lot of retellings. In like Kings and Chronicles, you get retellings of the similar stories. And what that tells me is not, I think that they had a very specific intention with that. I don't think that was an accident that they were retelling the same stories. I think that they had an intent. They were smart people. I have no problem saying that they were very intelligent people and that they were good writers and all those kinds of things. It was a part of their culture. But I do believe that they were human beings, and I don't believe that they had more access to God than I do. I don't believe that they had like some kind of divine inspiration more than I do. I think that as other human beings, they had the same access to God that I do. And like I said, they were just kind of doing their best to understand their cultural moment. And I think you can see that through the fact that like archaeology and geology don't prove the exact numbers and things that you read in the Bible. A lot of it is, I know that this can be a really triggering word, but a lot of it was, I believe it was intended to be mythology. It was mythology in the sense that it's a story that guides us to truth. I don't think mythology is fake news. I think mythology is a story that tells us a deeper truth. And I think that that's what they were trying to get at. So when I read the Bible, I read it like I would read a book where people are trying to convey a truth. They're trying to make sense of their world. But I do think that they had an agenda. That's another word that can be a bit triggering. But I think that they had an agenda. They had a purpose. And when we read the Bible, we do see a very patriarchal society. We don't see women being included in the authorship. That's for me. I think if God had given us this text, he would have given us the perspective of a group of people that makes up more than half of the world. So yeah, I love the Bible. I think the Bible is so fascinating and I love studying it. I will probably study it till the day I die. But I don't think that it was dictated by God verbatim.
Yeah, and I would
Okay.
think that probably Darian and I agree that it wasn't dictated
Yeah,
by God
for sure.
specifically. How I think about it is like the Ten Commandments dictated by God. His finger wrote it, right? And when Moses with Mount Sinai says the finger of God carved it. That's for sure part I'll be down for. But all the other parts, right? When Paul's writing the letters, I'm sure he's like being a pastor trying to help the Christians. And I don't think he knew the Holy Spirit was like causing him or influencing him to write down what we would call scripture. I think Paul just thought he was helping people out, and the Holy Spirit's like,
Yeah.
gotcha, you're also doing this. Now, one thing I'd be curious about your thoughts on with the conversations of like the patriarchal culture, or there's not a lot of books given or authored by women. I guess I'd be curious, like, do you think the Bible is like anti-women? And then there'd be another question there where I don't know the history of this, but I'd be curious about how many women in general in the cultures that the Bibles were written, the competing cultures, like for the New Testament, when the New Testament's being written in first century Rome, did the Greeks have female authors or not? That'd be a curious question. I think it'd be fascinating. That might help us figure out why that is the case, that there are no female authors, if you know where I'm going or have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. From what I know, I don't personally know of a ton of female authors from that time. I haven't really studied that a ton, but it does kind of beg the question, if female authors couldn't be included, why would God choose that point in time to have a book be, well, when I hesitate to say a book be written, because obviously the Bible is a collection of books. It was written over the course of many centuries. So like as a woman, I understand that it might be a little bit hard from a male perspective for you guys to see what it would feel like to be excluded from a book like that. But if God really wants to be the God of both men and women, I think it would be really important to have the voice of women included. And then kind of to answer your question about whether the Bible is anti-women, I think it really depends on where you're reading in the Bible. I would say Jesus's teachings are probably pretty progressive for the time. And I think you guys would probably agree with that as well. I think for their day and age, I think Jesus's teachings were progressive about women. However, there are so many other stories in the Bible that growing up, I read them and I was just like, oh yeah, cool. That's just the way it is. But looking back, I'm like, oh wait, the woman in that story was literally a piece of property. And if I was God and I was giving people a book for all time, I would value women the same that I value men. And the angle that stories are written in is usually from the male perspective. One example is the story of Lot. Are you guys familiar with the story of Lot and his daughters?
Yeah.
So his wife turns into the pillar of salt, and then the daughters get him drunk, right? And then he impregnates them, and that's how their lineage continues. Crazy story, absolutely crazy story.
Yeah, one of the wildest.
What'd you say?
One of the most wild, yeah.
Yes. I mean, the Bible should be R-rated. It's a crazy book.
Crazy for book. Sure. When I first read it page to page, I remember I was reading through like Judges and Joshua and Kings, and I was like, this is like, I never watched Game of Thrones, but I'm like, this is kind of what I assume Game of Thrones is like. I was like, this is insane.
It's probably Game of Thrones level. Yeah, absolutely. But that story, if you really think about that, do we really think it's possible for a man to be drunk enough that he doesn't recognize his daughters, but he's still able to impregnate them? That's not really possible. And so
I've had friends that's happened to, actually.
Okay.
But it is hard, 100%. But
well, I mean, if you think about it, like people get blackout drunk quite often. They have no idea what happened the day before or the night before. So it's not impossible to get blacked out. Yeah.
Not to be crass, but I think it's pretty difficult for men to get it up if
it can be. That is a stereotype.
Yeah. This story is a story of a man raping his daughters, but it's being framed from the angle of the man being the hero and the victim. And there are so many stories like that where women are the victims of men's actions, but it's not framed that way. It's framed as the men being the heroes. So that's kind of an example. Like, sure, maybe that happened, but the chances of that are so slim that he would not be able to recognize his own
so I
daughters.
guess,
And also, sorry.
oh, sorry, I just have a question, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, like getting pregnant doesn't usually happen the first time, as we know. So that was probably, this rape was probably something that was occurring multiple times, if this is a true story, right?
So I guess my question would be, so your premise is like, it's pretty hard for men to do that while blackout drunk. More likely than he wasn't blackout drunk. He probably abused his daughters, and then he retroactively, or someone retroactively, told the story to make him look like the person that was not able to consent somehow. Is that what you'd say?
Yeah. And it's not even necessarily just about that story, because I don't want to necessarily say that story was literally true and literally happened. It's more about the fact that that is the angle from which a lot of stories in the Bible are written. Yeah, it's written with the male perspective in mind. And that was the cultural moment at that time. At that point in time, men were often the ones who were educated and had access to being able to write and read. And that was their point in time. That was their moment in history.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I just want to make sure I'm following. And then Derry, you can jump in and I'll get off my question back and forth. Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding, because I think this is the first time I've heard this perspective of interpretation. So that's why I'm curious. So you're saying because men were educated and they were the ones who were doing the authorship and stuff like that, then they're writing. And is it kind of like you're questioning the motives of the author? Like you're like, is it actually like as it is, or is it just like men want to make themselves look good? That's like the bare bones way. I'm sure it's a lot more more respectful than that. But is that kind of where it comes from?
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't believe that the authors of the Bible had, I don't think that they are the definition or the barometer of love and truth, as we would say that God is.
Okay.
So that's how you would judge the inerrancy or the inspiration of Scripture, based off of what its moral teachings are saying. Like, you would disagree with the moral teachings.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of a few different things. Like, the moral teachings is one. The historical accuracy is one. There's just a few things. Like, I guess kind of what I'm saying is, like, the Bible could be divinely inspired and teach things that I personally dislike. That doesn't make it okay for me to reject it if I just don't like it, right?
Sure. I love that attitude. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to reject the Bible just because I dislike it. In fact, I would say I really do like the Bible. I think it's really impressive, like I was saying. I don't think this kind of gets at a bigger conversation, but disliking something or being hurt by something or offended, I don't think is ever a reason to reject something. So I'm not rejecting it based on that. I'm rejecting it more, or I don't even want to say rejecting. I'm not rejecting the Bible. I'm
the interpretation you were taught.
I'm rejecting the interpretation I was taught, and I am rejecting it as a book of, like, as the ultimate book of life, because I don't think that the teachings are all ethical, and because I don't think it's completely historically accurate, and because I don't think that the authors actually intended us to believe what evangelical Christians teach today.
Got it.
Yeah.
I think I've never seen those things as a problem for myself personally, because I think God has always been speaking throughout history in my mind. So when I see that, like, all the authors in Scripture are all male, I don't, like, obviously I'm a guy, like you said, right? But every author was a male. 6,000 years ago. When you get into the New Testament, you start getting a little more exposure for females because culturally it becomes a little more acceptable. And I've always just seen that as God moving through the culture that he's in, because he's always been speaking to people in the cultures that they're in, trying to move them forward. Like the line of morality, and Ethan, you can tell me if you disagree with this, the line of morality that God has always worked with has been to try to move the culture that he's been speaking to in forward. And so he almost condescends to, okay, if this culture is doing child sacrifice and rape is normal, let's get them to stop doing that and just move the line a little bit this direction. Because there's a perfect image in the future that's coming, but it's hard to get people to go from a black and white. And so God's working with people, and he's working in a culture. So when you were talking about how like you want, you were saying that there's, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Dang it. Ethan, you have something to say?
I'll just jump in while you're thinking about it. The idea of progressive revelation kind of makes me uncomfortable in its terms. Like when I hear it, I'm like, that sounds, I don't know, like shifty almost, like the people are trying to make an excuse for what I don't like that some Christians do is sometimes they'll like try to apologize for how God's revealed in the Bible. And part of me is like, guys, if we believe this is the truth about God, then we should just believe it. And now that's a crass way. That's a 30,000 view helicopter view, because there are a lot of nuances. But then when you're like, well, like, yeah, God, like why is there is discrepancies where, you know, God doesn't say in the beginning before the law, or even like, I think around the law they had one woman, one man marriages, but like before that, like Abraham had multiple wives, David had multiple wives, like David is after the law actually, so even with the law they had multiple wives. So these things were happening, and then Jesus shows up and he's like, you've heard it, like God said, or Moses said from the beginning, you know, one man, one woman. And people are like, well, that's a discrepancy. Like the Old Testament didn't really follow that. And I think that shows and provides the idea of progressive revelation. So even though sometimes I'm like uncomfortable with it, I'm like, oh, it's clearly there. It's for sure there. And especially like, and I don't know where I was going with that after. Derry, do you know where you're going to pick up from?
Well, I'll let you respond, Claire, and then I'll say what I was going to say.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I've been reading a book recently called How the Bible Works by Pete Enns. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Pete Enns.
I read a lot of his books in school.
I've heard his name.
Okay, nice. Well, in this book specifically, he's talking about how the Bible is a wisdom book, and it's a book of reinterpretation, which is kind of what I was getting at earlier. But as you're saying, Ethan, the Bible it's such a beautiful book in the sense that like it builds on itself. And the authors that come later are reinterpreting the stories of the past. And I think because of that, you really have to approach the Bible with wisdom. And I do think it's a book of wisdom that we can gain so much from. But I do think it's important to look at it through that lens. If we look at it as a static book that you can take everything in literally and be like, okay, like I am not going to wear mixed cloth clothes or eat shellfish or whatever. Like that's obviously going to drive us insane. Like that is not the point of the Bible. And I think you guys would probably agree with that.
Yeah. Is there a way to take it literally where you also aren't eating like you can still eat pork and all that stuff? Because I would say like there for sure is a way, because well, every Christian in the world does it. Everyone's eating like pork and not keeping the dietary laws. So right, we got to take things in context for sure. But I think you would probably agree with that. Like that Christians don't think we're under the Old Testament covenant. Like you're like, yeah, of course Jesus brought a new covenant.
If you've read Pete Enns a lot, you would probably come across some of his stuff on hermeneutics and how he interprets scripture, because it seems like you know a little bit at least about historical narrative. So why a lot of those questions that you asked originally had never been a huge problem for me was always because I'm interpreting them within the culture that they're in and the style of literature that they're trying to write in as well, like historical narrative. So within historical narrative, yes, the events that they're writing about are sensationalized to tell a story. Within traditional historical narrative, it doesn't mean that they never existed or that they didn't happen, but that the numbers, the places, and exactly how they happened can be changed to share a deeper truth. So for example, with like the Canaanites, they probably had some kind of battle with the Canaanites. Did they completely wipe them out? No, because we see the Canaanites later in scripture. Does that mean they're using some kind of war rhetoric language? Probably, especially when we look at the historical context. So we're looking at the style that the Bible is written in and interpreting it literally, but literally through the lens that it's written in. So we're not saying, okay, this person lived to be 900 years old. That means they're 900. Well, no, I'm reading it literally in that person, at least within the Jewish tradition, they think that they existed and they think that they're important because they gave him like a large age, because that's how you calculate importance for their culture that they lived in. So we're still using like a literal hermeneutic, but we're interpreting it the way it should be interpreted through the lens of who's writing it and what they think is important. And so why I would have a problem with your interpretation of Lot's story and that he raped his daughters is because there's tons of other stories before and after that where we see terrible things, murders and rape by the protagonists of the stories before and after God's using them. And so I don't know why, if they're not afraid to soil their own people's names by telling the truth about them later on and before, I don't know why they would shy away from that then as well. Because it doesn't seem to me like most of the Old Testament is propagandized very much, because they're very willing to be shameful. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess what I would say to that is I don't think that the same rule is necessarily going to apply to every author in the Bible. Just because like some of the authors of the Bible do write about really shameful things that our protagonists do, doesn't mean that the other authors are going to write that way. That's what I would say. I am going to have to go soon.
Yes,
but
sorry.
I just wanted to add one thought. I wonder if instead of the word literal, we could use the word serious. I wonder if you guys maybe mean we should take the Bible seriously, because it sounds like, even from what both of you guys are saying, you don't necessarily read the accounts as being literally true, but you guys do take it seriously. And I would agree with that. I agree that we should take the Bible seriously. But yeah, man, I feel like we could talk about so much more.
Yeah. You're always welcome to come back on anytime you want to talk.
I would say we could easily have part 2 next week. You know, we're like, we're really chill about that. That'd be really fun, because we're like, we're just getting to the meat of it, and I know we could go way deeper, and dissect our different opinions and challenge each other and go back and forth. It'd be a great time. So yeah, we could definitely got to get part 2 on the calendar, but I know you got a hard out. So
well, thanks so much, guys. This has been really fun.
Yeah,
Claire,
thank you for coming on.
Have fun at work.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
I'll see you soon.
Adios.
Bye.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. Unless, Derry, you want to keep podcasting for a little bit. But I figured
let's try live streaming.
Yeah, let's go to live stream right now. We're going to end the recording here, and hopefully we'll have part 2 up with Claire. That was really fun. If you guys like content where we talk to people who disagree with us, let us know. We love it. Like it's a great way. We're really discussing like changing the format of the show to just be more conversations with people we don't agree with. So let us know what you guys think, and have a great week. See you next time.
Shoots.